The Prime Minister has given a big speech yesterday at the Conservative Party conference. We covered it on this show. Well, he announced, among other things, that the northern leg of HS2 would be scrapped. Have a look at this.
I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project. And in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country.
Rishi Sunak also announced that he would be scrapping A-levels and replacing them with new qualifications, alongside proposing to ban smoking for the younger generation. So, have any of these plans swayed you? Do you think that the Conservatives can actually win the next general election? Ava.
I mean, it's a terrible slogan, isn't it? Long-term decisions for a brighter future. I mean, not to state the obvious, but they have been in power for 13 years and they've had a healthy majority for quite a number of those years. So it almost feels a bit silly. It's like, can someone talk to the guy in charge maybe about, taking some charge? And it should have been him. But, I actually think that yesterday's speech was more actually about preparing the Conservatives to be in opposition rather than preparing to be in government. I mean, it felt like he was setting traps for Keir Starmer. I mean, cancelling HS2, also a couple of weeks before when he cancelled a lot of the net zero pledges. Starmer's now going to have to either recommit that funding back to the original projects and take it out of the hands of the public that Sunak has now promised it to. If anything, I really just don't think this was an election speech. I don't think it was an election-winning speech.
But does he not have the point that, look, he has been in the job for about a year, just over a year. Mm-hmm. He is taking big decisions like the net zero changes that we saw a couple of weeks back. The idea that, well, I've sat down, I've seen how much this is going to cost, and I'm going to fix this for people. Same with HS2. Does he not have, Isabel, perhaps a point that, OK, the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, but he's not the Conservatives. He's a different person.
I think that's a really hard sell, actually. And
I'm trying my best.
It was very much the theme in this conference. I was in one fringe meeting, an event on the sidelines of the conference, which was actually attended by the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, several cabinet ministers. And I listened to a senior minister shout about it being time for change, time for a new Conservative government. And I thought, what were you about to call for a different party to be in charge? Because how can you pitch on time for change when you've been in power all these years? And I think Rishi Sunak is trying to pull off a kind of David Blaine level illusion here, that he's a completely new broom and none of what went before had anything to do with him. Remember, he was the Chancellor during COVID. He made many of the decisions that have left our country in the desperate state that it is now. He might argue he didn't make all of those decisions, but he was one of the 4 people who had the most powerful say over all those measures of furlough and lockdown, all the COVID investments in PPE and so on, the botched contracts. He was responsible for a lot of that. People shouldn't forget, and I don't think they will forget. OK, let's find out what people are saying at home. Roy in Wolverhampton. Good afternoon, Roy. Has he convinced you?
No, not really. I'll tell you what he's convinced me. That I don't really know whether they want to win the next election.
Well, that's what Isabel, you were saying this. Ava was saying that it sounded more like a sort of preparation to go into opposition. But what could he have said that would convince you, Roy?
Well, it's everything he's done. It's like cancelling the railway track. I can't remember the name of it. But if you'd have asked people earlier on, most people I know in the north wouldn't have wanted that track anyway, because we don't want to be in London any quicker. But I feel most people want to be out of London quicker.
Sounds like the dog doesn't want to be in London either. But was there anything that he could have said to encourage people to stick with the Conservatives, even though they've been in power for 13 years?
Really put a bit more effort into levelling up. I've seen nothing that's happening that's levelling anything up.
Well, what about the 36 billion he's going to save from HS2? He's going to spend all of that in transport in the North and the Midlands, and about a quarter of that on potholes everywhere.
I hope so.
I thought he'd cancel it because it was too expensive, and he hasn't got the money. So where's he going to suddenly get the money from to put all that into the Midlands?
Do you know what? That's a very good point. I wonder whether some of that 36 billion in savings might appear in the form of tax cuts just before the election. I don't know. Who knows? Perhaps.
And that wouldn't produce savings, though, would it? Tax cuts would be extra spend, so that wouldn't. But I would have asked Roy actually if it would have made a difference if you'd heard him announcing tax cuts, because you're right that most people up north, as he would see it, aren't sort of very obsessed by HS2. What they want is something that makes their life a little bit less expensive. So would you like to have heard him talk more about that?
No, I'd like to hear him talking a bit of sense. You know, we keep hearing about the water companies have been fined for polluting the rivers. What's happened to that money? Because now we find out we're going to have to pay more water rates to put the problem right. No, not all the money that they've fined them. What's happened to that?
OK, Roy, thank you. Keep your calls coming in. I know a lot of you want to have your say, whether you've been convinced by Rishi Sunak, whether you think he's actually done enough in the Conservative Party conference to win the next general election. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, let's speak to Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
I guess I'm going to ask you the same question, Tobias. Do you think that Rishi Sunak did enough yesterday to steer the Conservatives to, what would it be, a fifth consecutive general election win?
Yeah, I think Isabel summed it up very well indeed. Trying to secure that fifth general election success is going to be difficult. Let's straight away acknowledge it's been a tough couple of years recently, unedifying times for the Conservatives, a turnover of prime ministers. But I have to say that under this current Prime Minister, the party has finally begun to progressively regroup, to refocus, to exhibit the discipline that the nation expects. There's been a sense of purpose returned to number 10 to tackle those big issues facing Britain, the necessary difficult policy decisions, both domestically and indeed internationally. Inflation is now decreasing significantly, and that's good to tackle the cost of living crisis. We're getting back to fiscal responsibility. But in answer to your points that you were talking about earlier, we've just had that party conference. From my perspective, I wasn't there. I was in Warsaw at a security conference there talking about Ukraine. But it looked like it was clearly being used to shore up support from the party base. So it wasn't necessarily an election speech, I think has been suggested. I strongly hope now that we look to extend our appeal beyond the party base. That's the only way we're going to win the next general election, because a party exhibiting competence, discipline, unity, leadership, and above all, evolving and advancing vision, especially after 13 years, that's what will appeal to the electorate. That's what will win the elections. A party exhibiting tribal division, infighting, an absence of focus, that will not secure enough support, and that is destined for us to be in opposition. OK,
Tobias, you mentioned unity. You mentioned a party exhibiting infighting is not what you need if you're striving to win that fifth consecutive general election. Is there unity between the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister? Suella Braverman, in her speech, warned of a hurricane of mass migration, attacked the luxury beliefs of the liberal-leaning people. Let's look at the hurricane of mass migration. She also previously said in Washington that multiculturalism had failed. Rishi Sunak has distanced himself from those comments. He refuses to say that multiculturalism has failed. In fact, I think he has also been saying that this country is one of the most successful multicultural societies. Is there a rift between the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister?
Well, you have to ask those two individuals. There is a reshuffle coming up, I understand, so maybe we'll learn more there. But I just underline the fact that, no UK party wins elections when they are divided or when they fight from the extreme, whether that be Labour on the left or the Conservatives on the right. History shows the Conservatives win elections when we fight from the centre ground, from the centre right. That's the platform from where our great Tory prime ministers have started from in the past, from Baldwin, Disraeli, Churchill, Thatcher as well. They've all united, the strength and the competence of the party to fight the election from that centre position. When we stand together and fight together, then we win. But if we don't do that, then we actually look divided and distracted, and we gift power, to Labour. We also should bear in mind the fact that as we dominate the headlines with all perhaps a little bit of infighting, this tribal warfare and the headlines that you've just mentioned, we deny the opportunity to shine the light on what Labour stands for. And I'm not sure anybody knows that yet. Okay. Also, the polls are slightly misleading in the sense that they remove the don't knows. There are about 25% in all the polls that are that soft vote, if you like. All right. They've yet to make up their mind. Okay. And I suspect that, in football terms, you could argue that we're deep into the second half. We're 2-1 down, but we're behind because of own goals. We start to show greater competence. Then we'll be able to illustrate what the country actually wants to see. And that will shine greater light, I'm afraid, on Labour. And don't forget what happened last time they were in power.
This is a long
Tobias, only because I want Isabel and Ava have also got questions for you. And of course, we can find out all about Labour with their Conservative Party conference in Liverpool today. This weekend, apologies. Isabel, what would you like to ask Tobias?
Congratulations on that very long party political broadcast. I'm not sure it's left any of us, respectfully, any much the wiser. You've talked repeatedly about fighting on the centre grounds. Well, can you tell us what that means for immigration then? What does fighting from the centre ground mean for the key number one thing that's bothering people alongside the economy and the NHS is immigration, legal and illegal. What does fighting from the centre ground mean for that?
Well, it means looking at that particular issue through the other end of the lens. All these places where these migrants are coming from are places that we've abandoned. Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so forth. These are places that we've gone into and then strategically lost our patience and then departed. And that migration channel will continue to grow even worse as climate change bites in as well. So us looking at this from the Dover perspective is the wrong end of the lens. I don't doubt that some of the policies that Rishi Sunak has put forward are sensible, but ultimately this is an international effort. There are actually more migrants entering France and Germany and in other parts crossing the Mediterranean as well. This is an international concern, but we're simply looking at it from the UK perspective. There's some leadership to be done. And in fact, this is exactly what Rishi Sunak is doing in Granada at the European political community meeting this very day today. Okay. And that's, again, an illustration of what Britain should be doing, is rekindling our international statecraft to meet some of these bigger challenges.
Okay. One quick question from Ava as well, because we're tight on time. Ava?
Yeah, well, I know the Conservative Party is a broad church and you are talking about fighting the election from the centre ground, but do you not think that perhaps your personal position as an MP, are you not legitimising the sort of language that Suella Braverman has been using about migrants and about, other parts of the party about gender ideology? Are you not legitimising it by standing with them?
Oh, come on, that's a bit unfair.
Let him answer.
That is unfair.
Let Tobias answer. Tobias.
Can I have a go?
Yes, you can.
I was asked this on the Peston show on Wednesday, and I absolutely stood up and categorically distanced myself from that language. It is damaging. It is unhelpful. It's not the sort of language the Conservative Party should be using. It's inflammatory. And it does nothing apart from appeal to certain quarters of the political spectrum. And that's not going to win us general elections. Okay. Can I be any more clearer than that?
No, Tobias, you've been very clear and very generous with your time. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Tobias Ellwood there, the MP for Bournemouth East. We've got some time to take some of your calls. Plenty of you wanting to have your say. Keith in Birmingham. Good afternoon, Keith. What would you like to say?
Basically, that's I think they're on course to win the next election. So far, so good. They're coming. They keep on beating Labour to the punch with their policies that are attracting the electorate. But I think she's dealt with the Netflix for the net zero right. For the time being.
Okay.
And also the pollution of the rivers and streams and the beaches and everything. I think he could do a little bit more with that, because that is a huge electorate, because nobody wants that.
OK, but you are convinced that they're heading for victory, Keith?
Well, they're going in the right direction. What has Labour got? What is Labour offering? So far, they're trying hard to think of something to come up with, but they haven't come up with anything so far.
OK, Keith, thank you for that. That's something that we're getting from a lot of our callers here. They don't quite know where Labour stand. But look, don't go anywhere because we're going to be taking more of your calls on this.